We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read. Oh.
Hey, it's me, Mark. Welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. At least that's what my brother thinks. If you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Now, today we are continuing our deep dive into the Devil's Due era of G.I. Joe with a special interview. And before I introduce that person, I'll just bring along the devil on my shoulder. It is a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners.
Hello, Tim. Now, today, you and I are going to be talking to Christopher Crank, a.k.a. Crank! Exclamation mark. We'll ask him about how to pronounce that in a minute, I think. He is a comics letterer based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. His work includes lettering things such as Revival, Hack Slash, Rick and Morty, Battlepug, and very excitingly, actually for me, and probably for you, Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters, which is Chris Samney's recent book. But beyond that, and most importantly for us here today, he was part of the Devil's Due bullpen, as it was the webmaster for the Devil's Due era of G.I. Joe, the letters page man for a time, and also the letterer on G.I. Joe for a little while on Devil's Due as well, and much more besides, which I'm sure we'll get into. So all of that intro done. Welcome to the podcast, Crank.
Hi. Sorry. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right.
How do we pronounce Crank? Is it just always shouted? How do we know that we've got the exclamation mark in there?
I'm just a very excitable person, so it. Actually, it's kind of a joke because I'm kind of deadpan most of the time. It's just a way of making it happier, I guess. I guess I was going for an effect, with the all lowercase and the exclamation point. Don't really remember why because it's been so long.
I'm interested in it always sounding like a problem or a complaint, particularly from another room. Crank!
That might be how it got started. Yeah, I don't really remember. It actually is my last name, just for the record. I mean, without the exclamation point, but.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if punctuation is allowed on official like birth certificates and all of that kind of stuff. Possibly not.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I just let me interject something here real quick because I'm kind of excited about it, even though I've already missed it. While I was waiting for us to get started, I was looking up. I remembered the Robo Skulls from Action Force, and because I think Devil's Due, we did have Red Shadows art, didn't we?
That's right, yeah.
I don't remember if
the end of Brandon Joe had the Red Shadows.
Right, and I don't remember if we got to work the Robo Skull into that or not.
No, it was kind of the name Red Shadows and I guess the costume being red was about as far as you went with that whole thing.
Well, hey, at least we got the name right. Because I remember we liked, me and Sam Wells, who worked at Devil's Due, we loved the Robo Skull. We thought it was just awesome, And I think we were probably pushing to get it worked in, but there was probably some sort of licensing thing involved. But I was just looking up the Robo Skull because I was trying to make sure it was actually called the Robo Skull, and somebody's making a new one.
That's right, yeah. The fine folks at Skeletron are making a Robo Skull Mark II.
And it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah, it sure does. It's fantastic.
So, yeah, anyway, sorry, I just wanted to mention that before I forgot because I was kind of excited when I saw it, but I've already missed the Kickstarter and everything. But,
Well, I do hope that's part of your research for joining us today. You sort of led astray and end up buying a Robo Skull. That would be great.
It'd be nice if I could, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Yeah. So Crank is your surname, right? But how did it end up being used as your sort of nom de plume, where it, your professional work?
Well, in the offices, we usually went by our last names.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember how that got started, and not everybody did. Like Josh, we still call it Josh, but Mike was Norton, I was Crank, Tim Seeley, stuff like that. And I guess I had another online nickname, which was just a portmanteau of my first and last name, and I stopped using that when we started the Joe message boards, and I needed a new one, so I just went by my last name.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's how that got started. And so when I started working as a letterer and needing my name for professional credits and stuff, I just went by that because it was easy to spell. It's very small, because if I put my full name out on a book, it's like a really long name,
Right.
So Crank was easy. It was pithy. It stays in people's memory.
The letterers often go a little bit sort of uncredited and things like that. And I guess if you've got a shorter name, then it's more likely to be included as a credit on the cover, potentially.
Yeah. And and that's only, heck, the past 7-8 years that letterers really started getting cover credit regularly. But yeah, anyway, so that's how that happened.
Were you always reading comics?
I had gotten back into it. Like, I read comics as a kid. I think my very first comic was, I broken my arm and I was in the hospital, and my mom went down to the gift shop and got me it was a DC book. It was what was it? Not League of Superheroes, but
Legion,
yeah, the one set in the future.
Yeah. 31st century or the 30th century.
Yeah, and it was like an issue of that. Like, I think it was a double issue or something. So maybe it was an annual or a special or something.
This hospital sounds great. Comics in the gift shop.
Yeah. This was back in 84, I guess.
Did that get you into comics? Did you seek more out?
Yeah, because following that, I started getting into X-Men, and of course I started buying G.I. Joe. I want to say, I guess I must have been buying G.I. Joe, because I think my first issue of G.I. Joe was that one where they were in Central Park. It was like issue 5.
Yeah.
But that was back in like 82 or 83.
Yeah.
So maybe I broke my arm earlier than I thought I did. But anyway.
Where did you get your comics after the hospital?
Generally, I didn't know of any comic shops close to me, so I would get them like either at the grocery store or the gas station, or like a 7-Eleven-y kind of thing, convenience stores, I think.
And where was this?
Cincinnati.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up here.
Yeah, and while we're talking about the young Crank and G.I. Joe, you start getting the comics. Did G.I. Joe have a big impact on young you? Did you continue buying the comics? Did you collect the toys? Did you check out the cartoon?
Oh yeah, I was just the right age for that when it came out, because that was, that all kind of hit right in 82, right? I think. Yeah,
started. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was a little late on the comics, but definitely I was playing with the toys and I was watching the cartoon. Yeah, I'm trying to remember, like, that first wave of Joe stuff. I had a good chunk of it, because there wasn't that much of it at first in that first wave. You had like a dozen action figures, I think, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a couple of playset toys and stuff. Like I actually had the Mobat, which was cool, because you could make it go by itself, and that was neat. But and I already had a bunch of Star Wars stuff, so like any vehicles I needed, I would just pull from the Star Wars toys and put the G.I. Joe guys in them.
Right, yeah. I think a lot of us did that.
Right. I did not. We did. My brother and I did not mix
Tim was
our
a purist.
Toys.
Yeah. I remember specifically, I had a friend of mine had broken my X-Wing in a fit of anger, I think. So I took the parts and pieced them together into a new type of vehicle, like what I could salvage of it, and then I used that for G.I. Joe stuff as like a glider kind of thing.
Cool.
Early customization, I guess.
When did you grow out of G.I. Joe?
It was probably about the same time I grew out of a lot of stuff, because I was buying the toys and then starting around issue 5 of the comic, and my family moved to Florida for about a year, and in Florida, the money situation got kind of weird, so I didn't have a lot of spending cash or anything. So while I was down there, there was this flea market. This place called Howard's, I think, or something like that. But anyway, in one corner of it, there was a used bookseller, and he also did comic book stuff, and he would take comics and trade. So I had my whole collection up to that point, which was 85. I think that was in 85. So up to maybe in the 40s or something like that. And the only way I could get new comics was to trade in my old comics. So I traded in my G.I. Joe stuff to get like newer comics, you know. And then even that kind of ran out after a while. So after we moved back from Florida, still the money situation was weird, and I kind of just got out of buying comics because I couldn't afford them. You know? And then in the boom in the 90s again, I started buying comics around 91, 92 again. But at that point, G.I. Joe wasn't around, you know. So
did you discover a comic book store later? Did you have a store you'd go to?
Yeah, pretty regularly actually. All through the 90s, I went to a place called and now that you're asking me, I am completely blanking on the name.
Well, if you come up with it later before we finish the episode, just blurt it out.
I think it was Mavericks. Gosh, I knew it like just before I was going to say it. But yeah, I did have a regular comic shop in the 90s.
Could you get there yourself on a bike or the bus?
I was driving by then, so
okay,
yeah. I mean, I guess I could have got there on a bike, but
you were no longer dependent upon grown-ups.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, this was in the 90s, so
okay.
I was already I guess, I mean, I graduated high school in 92, so I guess I was still with my parents for a little while into the 90s.
So getting back into comics in the 90s, I think I can take a guess, but what were the comics that were most grabbing you?
Image stuff, Malibu. I didn't really buy Marvel. I tried to get back into X-Men, but that was right at the point where they were, you know, X-Men Gold, X-Men Blue, X-Men Fuchsia. I don't know. There were like a ton of them. And I was just like, all my favorite characters from the 80s X-Men were suddenly spread across a bunch of different books. And I'm like, I'm not buying all these, you know? So I was sticking to stuff that was like single line comics, you know? Like I was buying Spawn and started getting into like indie stuff too at the time, I think. Oh, and DC's Vertigo. Like in the 90s, DC's Vertigo was just awesome. Like,
yeah. Yeah, it was all dark fantasy and crime and horror.
And just weird stuff. Like, you know, anything that basically DC's main line couldn't do, Vertigo was doing it. They were very much like Marvel's Epic in the 80s, I think. Like,
was it at this point, did you start to think you wanted to work in comics, or did that happen later, that feeling?
Yeah, because, you know, I drew as a kid, but I was never a great line artist, illustrator, I guess. In the 90s, I tried my hand at inking for a little bit. I met somebody local that was a penciler, and I was trying my hand at inking. Wasn't very good at that either. And then I guess this is going to come along in the conversation anyway, but, you know, I met up with Josh, and oddly, he was working with a fella I used to be in a band with in high school, and which was just one of those weird things that, like, we didn't know each other through them. Like, we all knew each other independently. But once I started working with Josh in the late 90s, then we did the pitch for G.I. Joe, and that kind of got me into comics again, like working in comics, I should say.
Did you meet at like a comic convention or something along those lines?
The first time I actually met Josh was this is really weird because we had multiple mutual friends that, again, were just all independent of each other. The girl he was dating at the time was somebody I knew she went to an art school here in town, and I knew her from another art school student that I hung out with. And then his roommate was a friend of my roommate. I mean, we were kind of friends too, but we were more like acquaintances at that point. And then he also, he put on a show, I remember, like a punk and ska show at a hall, like a VFW hall. And my roommate's band was playing part of that show, and I think that's the first time I actually met him. He had a table set up and had his comics and stuff there. Or I was either that or I met him at his house because of his roommate knowing people I lived with. Something like that. But that's how we met each other. It wasn't actually at a comic thing.
How does that start to develop into him doing more work or being able to offer you work, or the two of you working on things together?
Well, also at that point, I had been doing websites for a little while, and I had just started getting into animating stuff with Macromedia Flash, which I don't even think anybody supports that anymore. But at the time, it was probably the best way to deliver animated stuff online. So I had been doing that stuff, and he was just starting to work on a new book that was called, I don't think it was called Misplaced then. It was called something else, but I can't remember what. It's what we wound up publishing as Devil's Due is Misplaced. And he needed web stuff for it, so I started working with him on that, and we started kind of doing a general Devil's Due website. And then he told me one day, he's like, I'm going to try and pitch this thing to Hasbro. You want to help me on this? Like put together like a presentation package and that. I'm like, because he wanted to launch it with, heavy web presence and stuff like that. And so I helped. We did this animated thing that was real short, but it was basically just like an intro to what the pitch was going to be about. And I think we had some sample art in there. And I think the whole thing was themed like Duke giving a briefing or something like that. And this was all, I want to say early 2000. I guess it could have been late 99, but I think it was like early 2000.
Were you two in the same space? Were you only communicating on phone or online?
I'd go down. He was working out of his apartment at the time, and I'd go down and we'd sit down and talk about what was going on and stuff. A lot of it was through emails, like emails or on the phone at that point.
Do you remember when he got the license? Do you remember sort of it becoming bigger?
It was all, and I don't think I'm giving anything away here because I think Josh has already said that it was all kind of, smoke and mirrors at the time.
You are not giving anything away, but please, as much detail about how much smoke and how thin those mirrors were.
It's not as sordid as it sounds or anything. And frankly, if there's anything to pin blame on, per se, which I don't see why there would be, it's as much Hasbro's fault because they didn't do any due diligence on it. So, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that when he pitched that, the image he presented of the whole situation was that of a more established company. I don't think he ever out and out lied about anything, but it was just, he gave the impression that it was more concrete than it actually was,
Can I take a guess here? Like he might have said something like us or we, when at that point the company is just him.
Yeah, probably. And I mean, he probably referred a lot to it as just like, he didn't say, probably did not use the singular pronoun very much. He used Devil's Due as a thing, like.
Right. And he was never saying, oh my gosh, it's just me in my apartment. But
no, because if he would have said that,
Hasbro wasn't asking, is it just you? How many people work for you?
Right. I mean, if they would have been doing due diligence, they probably would have asked for like a company, prospectus, I think, or whatever. They would have asked for more company information, number of employees, annual income, stuff like that. And I don't think they did, So anyway, Josh got together an artist and inker, hired a letterer from out of town. I think it was Dreamer. I think it was the same letterer that was on the book, on the regular run for a long time. And I think the letterer got paid, but all the rest of us were kind of just working on back end, like on spec, I guess you'd call it.
Not until the money comes in from issue 1 from Image.
Right. And I think we worked it, because at first it was being pitched as a 4-issue thing, just because you had to put a number on it because you didn't know what it was going to do,
Yeah.
So I think the deal was for the 3 of us, or actually it was 4 of us at that point, was that we were just splitting the money from the book. I can't remember what the split was, but it might have even been like an even 4-way split because everybody was kind of taking a chance at that point. Josh was taking the most financial risk. I remember him, I think he had 2 or 3 credit cards he maxed out.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And it was, yeah, so I mean the financial burden was definitely on him. But, the rest of us were putting in our time and creativity and stuff on it. And so, like I said, I don't remember exactly what the split percentage was, but it was more than fair, I think, in the long run.
And you were making the website or wrangling the discussion board at this point with issue 1 or ahead of time?
let's see. Leading up to the actual release of it, I was doing some coordination work between like getting the files together and getting files transferred to other people and stuff like that. I was handling building the website. Like I said, I had worked on the pitch, and and the message board. We started up a message board, which didn't really do much of anything until after the first issue launched. Or actually, it might have started picking up just before that because we did a con special that was like a pre-release.
Yeah, you say that. I remember being on the message boards in the run up to issue 1, and I was somewhat addicted to the message board at the time. And there was quite a big and active community, and I think sort of ahead of the launch, there was quite a big kind of like expectation of what's going to happen with this new comic, and a lot of people sort of discussing and almost like rediscovering G.I. Joe after the time they'd been away, and sort of, I guess, before the issue 1 had launched, there wasn't a huge amount to discuss. So it was very much sort of like talking about the Marvel days.
Yeah, and I think we were getting some spillover from like yojo.com and stuff like that. Just people who were already an online Joe community were checking us out to see what was going on. Because I used to visit pretty regularly a bunch of those other websites just as research and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember where all. I remember yojo.com. Battle Lines, maybe? I don't remember if that was around back then.
That was later.
Okay, and then His Tank was later too, I think. That was probably like 06 or 05 or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember that being available at the time. I think it was
pretty much
Yojo.
Probably
just
yeah.
I can't even remember the date that Yojo went live, to be honest.
I'm pretty sure they were around before we were. Like, definitely they were because I remember going there to look up like file cards and stuff because they were very informational.
Yeah, I know that there wasn't a huge amount of other places that people could go to, chat G.I. Joe. A lot of the websites that followed were later down the years, and you didn't have the likes of Facebook and things like that at the time, obviously. So there was less places to go. So I think a lot of people congregated, at least initially, in the Devil's Due forums. And
the year that Yojo launches is 1997.
Okay, yeah, I remembered them being around because I think that's how. Was it there that I found out about the what was the people that were trying to get it before us? Bench Press?
Yeah.
Which was late 90s, I guess, 99 maybe?
Yeah.
And I think that's where I first saw, like, because they actually had posted some art and stuff too, I think.
Yeah, the 4 pages penciled by Ron Lim.
Ron Lim, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So San Diego, when Blaylock, when we interviewed him, he was talking about the convention special.
Sure.
He said, and then Image, I found out Image would make you a preview book, and they would consider that part of the promotional budget. And they asked if I was going to San Diego. That's how I afford to get to San Diego. We'll make this book. We'll just sell it there. We just sat there with our little army green plastic containers and some military like camo tarp thrown over the booth and sold books. And that got us through until like 3 months later, that first check came in from issue 1.
That sounds about right. I wasn't at the first convention or at the first San Diego convention that they did as Devil's Due.
Okay.
I think the first convention I did with Devil's Due was in Chicago. And yeah, I remember very well. We were actually right next to again, I'm blanking with names. He's like the lead Image guy, Walking Dead. Kirkman.
Robert Kirkman.
Yeah, we were right next to him when he was doing a book called Battlepug. Sorry.
Battlepug, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I remember he had this big elaborate, like, again, to echo what Josh said, we had basically just this camo thing going on, like green and camo-y and whatever, and ammo boxes and things. And it was very low budgety, I guess. And so we were next to Kirkman, and he had this big elaborate thing, even though he was still like fairly unknown, except for doing stuff like Battlepug and that, But his booth stuff kept falling over. And I had to, like, me and somebody else that was working the booth had to go over and give him a hand to like shore it all up so it wouldn't fall down on us. Basically, because it was all this like metal girder stuff, and that it's funny in retrospect, But
sorry, I've interrupted you. Do you have other early convention memories?
I'm
like, were you surprised by the crowds, or were you overwhelmed because it was sort of bigger than Blaylock's sort of small dream was?
I'd have to backtrack a little bit on that because, like I said, leading up to it, we did a lot of work in 2000, like a year before the book actually came out. We were getting stuff together. And when it finally came out, of course, it was the day after 9/11. And we were pretty worried about that because we didn't know what was going to happen. It's like, is it a really good idea to have a book about, an anti-terrorism organization going on right after we've been hit, There was no planning involved in that, of course, because that's just when the book was supposed to come out. And there wasn't anything we could do about it in between the 11th and the 12th. It's not like we could, all that stuff was already in stores, So, we were worried and we didn't know what was going to happen. So, and of course, going back to the message board, that I was the guy that moderated that thing at the time. And it got really complicated at that point because, you had the people that liked it and were happy that Joe was there to kind of help get them through the emotional part of 9/11. And then I remember distinctly one person coming on there and just talking about how America deserved it,
Oof.
Which, that's their opinion. That's the way I try to moderate. I mean, your opinion's fine, but you kind of got to use a little bit of tact, And I remember having to shut that conversation down because it got out of hand really fast. So yeah, by the time, issue 1's out, and by the time I hit conventions, it was actually at the conventions. It definitely picked up after issue 1 came out. When all we had was like the preview book, it was just some curiosity, like, oh, G.I. Joe's coming back, kind of thing, or like people that had seen stuff about it in Wizard or whatever. But then after issue 1, yeah, we started actually getting not lines, but like actually a lot of traffic past the table. I don't know if I answered your question. I got really long-winded there.
Yeah. The other question I had was, do you remember when the office, when it went from being Blaylock's apartment to a very small office to a slightly less small office, and when you started going in every day, or when you moved, or when they moved? Can you talk about that progression?
Well, okay, so my first experience was Josh working out of his dining room area when he still lived here in Cincinnati. And, again, we would get together and just kind of talk about what I needed to do. If I had ideas for stuff, because we were, like I said, we were planning on launching with a pretty strong web presence. We wanted that. We couldn't do what Hasbro did in the 80s. We didn't have the money for the cartoons and stuff. And we didn't have a license to do a cartoon or anything. And we obviously couldn't produce toys because that's Hasbro's domain. So, we were like, well, we can at least do this stuff. And that's why we were doing like animated web commercials and stuff like that. We had planned on launching like ancillary website material and like even different domains and stuff that were all kind of interconnected to each other. So that was all 2000-ish. I think at the end of 2000, beginning of 2001 was when Josh moved to Chicago. And I think pretty quickly he got himself a very tiny office space closet. It was above a 7-Eleven, which once I moved out there, I loved, because after a while they got to know what brand of cigarettes I liked, and I always went in there and bought those little tubey pizza things. They're kind of like corn dogs, but with pizza inside of them. So yeah, 2000. I'm guessing 2001 was when that happened, and then shortly before I moved out there, he expanded into a second office space, but kept the first one. But we started using that one as a closet, an actual closet, since that's pretty much what it was. And then I moved out in early 2002, and at that point we had the closet and 2 decent-sized office spaces, and then sometime a few months after that, we got this bigger office space that became like the administration office space, like Josh's area and his assistant and stuff like that.
And kept the 2 spaces in the closet, or dropped them?
And kept the 2 spaces in the closet, yeah. So
these are all in the same building. Right.
So we were basically taking over, like a third of the office space at this top floor above a 7-Eleven. And I was back in with Tim and Mike, so that was basically the art room, I guess you'd call it. Art and production room. And then, like I said, Josh had the biggest office for him and his assistant, and then like a meeting table kind of thing for if somebody came in that he had to have a meeting with or something, And then Susan and Josh James, I think, at first were in the front office part, and they were taking care of business stuff, answering phone calls, sending out mail, mail order stuff. Because at first we had, we offered mail order stuff right off the bat, so we were doing that as part of our company stuff, And then around, I guess it was early 2004, we moved into a much larger space that was custom built out. And like, when I say that, I just mean like the desks were and cubicle areas were all built to our spec, kind of thing.
And you then dropped the previous office space.
Right, yeah. Which, again, I missed because I liked that 7-Eleven.
How far away were you from that 7-Eleven in the newer space?
Oh, far enough. I lived in Chicago for about 6 years, and I moved every 2 years. So, but, fortunately that happened to coincide pretty much with like office changes, like when we moved to the second office space. And then I was able to just get my new place in walking distance of the second office space. So I was still pretty far away from that 7-Eleven. So yeah, I lost contact with my 7-Eleven people. It's kind of like having a bartender that knows you and knows what drink to put up right when you walk in.
I own a comic book store, and my manager and one of my employees, I guess all three of my employees, know customer preferences.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, this guy is getting not all the X-Men books, but some of the X-Men books, and there's this special. And like, okay, this customer is going to want the special, even though he hasn't asked. And this other customer, I don't think she's going to want it, because the last time we offered her this extra, she didn't want it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, my guy Leo at Mavericks, and then it was Mavericks. Yeah, in the 90s, he was like that. We got to know each other because we'd sit there and talk when I came in weekly. And it got to the point where, even if it wasn't on my pull list, he kind of knew what stuff I like. So
yeah,
he'd pull things and recommend them to me.
So in addition to web design, web building, and discussion board moderating, did you have additional jobs at Devil's Due which sort of came and went, or which were a surprise, or which you sought out that maybe you weren't getting credit for?
I don't know. I mean, like at first, again, because we were a very small company, just a handful of people, really. Everybody wore a bunch of different hats at first. It felt very much like working like on a DIY project or something, a little scrappy team of people. And so when an issue of something would come in or whatever, I besides whatever I was supposed to be doing, like the web stuff or the animated things or whatever, I would do editorial. Sometimes I would do art corrections. Sometimes I would do lettering corrections. Sometimes I lettered even before I was a letterer, because we like had to scramble to get something done. Not on Joe particularly, but like on the other books we were working on. Joe, I do remember doing some art corrections on that though, like last minute stuff where Hasbro would send back some sort of revision they wanted, but we didn't have time to shoot it back to the colorist or the artist or anything, depending on who it was. I remember. I mean, and this was all between 2002 and 2004, I think, because like once we moved to that second office, we hired more people, and I guess you could say we became less DIY and more corporate-y structured. I mean, I guess that's the concept I'm trying to get across there. But yeah, early on, I mean, all of us were we had our primary jobs, but we were all kind of chipping in on whatever needed doing.
Did you do any taking of envelopes to the post office to mail out?
I never actually did that. That was all, I think, Josh James and Susan Bishop that would take care of that stuff, I think.
Mark, I've been hogging the mic. Jump in.
Yeah, no, I was just sort of curious more about the sort of the website stuff, because it struck me at the time and sort of particularly thinking back to it, that how forward thinking it is, that launching something these days, you need a web strategy, you need to be out there in the social media getting word out, and it seems like such a big part of Devil's Due was having a really effective web presence and a really the community really engaged on the message board and all that kind of thing. So it was and yeah, talking about it as well, I'm now reminded of those flash animations for the trailers. No one else was doing that kind of thing, or if they were, it was sort of one in a 1,000 books. Marvel might decide to do something every now and again, but yeah, it was almost like every month. Here's a flash trailer for the next issue of G.I. Joe, sort of with sort of animated panels and a soundtrack. Get everyone excited, looking forward for the next issue. Yeah, just really sort of any sort of memories that stick out from that element of the website, the message boards from that time.
Sure. Well, okay. So yeah, touching back on the early stages of stuff, we had intended to again emulate sort of like that multimedia blitzkrieg that Hasbro accomplished in the 80s, or we were trying to anyway. So we wanted a strong web thing. In fact, I think when we launched, G.I. Joe wasn't even under. I mean, we had like a section referring to it on the Devil's Due website, but we had a whole separate G.I. Joe website. I think it was like GIJoecomic.com or something like that. Something. I don't remember exactly what the URL was, but so we had a whole separate thing. I was actually maintaining 2 websites for us at the time, and we had intended, besides the animated things, I remember I was doing a little looking back in my files after you guys first got in touch with me, and I found we were going to do kind of like interactive online file cards, I remember. And I had some samples of it. The only one I actually had done was a Cobra Commander one. And it was just, my proposal, I think, to Josh, I found this letter pitching them to him, and or email or something. And I think my proposal was something along the lines of, at the end of the book, we were going to just enter a code that you could put into the website and then get to the file cards kind of thing, and you would unlock a new one each month kind of thing.
When you say interactive, what about the file card was interactive?
Oh, just each file card was basically like a mini website for a character, but it was all done in Flash. So you'd have...
So stuff would move.
Yeah, or you could click on things to access further information, or like to change images or something like that, to get more images or whatever. I think the Cobra Commander one, I had 3 or 4 sections to it, and it would switch like the cursor, because with Flash you could actually change the cursor that the person saw once they entered the Flash window, and so it was this little techie rotating cursor thing. I think it was probably just a miniature version of like the loading screen that I used for the commercials and stuff. Anyway, so like, yeah, it had a little animated cursor thing, and it would make noises when you'd hover over stuff, like little techie beep beep noises and stuff. And you could just unlock different sections that showed like different artwork of the character, like your basic file card, like profile information and stuff like that was up front, but then you get into like subsections. That was the idea anyway, but I believe, because we had that, and then I mentioned this in the emails we were talking about, there was going to be a separate online, kind of like a U.S. Armed Services like magazine kind of thing that was called Lens. I found the files for it. It was called Lens, and it was
You mean like camera lens?
Yeah, it was, and it was written in the voice of Scoop, or basically Scoop was supposed to be the one in charge of this magazine, Lens magazine. And so there were, we had like a dozen, maybe 20 articles prepped and ready to go, and I had done several of them as a website already. Like, and we were going to monthly, I think we were going to launch further sections of it or whatever, more articles. And it was stuff like Flint on retirement, and profile on CoverGirl, stuff like that. Like very basic. Like, but the point of it was that it was supposed to be like as if a magazine existed for G.I. Joe in the real world that was actually real. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and this did not happen?
Right, and I believe it didn't happen because Hasbro didn't want us to do it, and I believe it had something to do with, I want to say it had something to do with the license that we had, which, covered making comic books. And I think they pretty bluntly said, look, you've got a license to make comic books. And, you can have a website to support that, to, give information about it, but generating all this new content just isn't in your purview, kind of thing. Which I think is why I only had one finished file card, and we never launched even that one. we didn't launch this lens thing. We had a third website we were going to do that was like Department of Defense, like a mock Department of Defense website. That I can't even remember what was going to exactly be on there. By the time we were getting into that, they had already said no to this other stuff, so it was like, oh, we can't do that either. I'm kind of surprised. I think the only reason they let us do the animated Flash stuff was because it was actually commercials for our books. If we were just going to do that to like make a new story or something, they probably wouldn't have let us do that, because that would probably infringe on doing like an animated license or something, you know?
So when you too have been describing these Flash trailers for upcoming issues, I'm trying to imagine it because I don't think these are anywhere archived on the internet. So I'm imagining there's like text, like motion graphics, where like the G.I. Joe logo shows up and it moves like past, or like Cobra Commander's name shows up, Cobra Commander, and you see like a page or a panel, and then maybe it like swipes left or swipes right or zooms in. Imagining a lot of that stuff, and I'm guessing you were not creating artwork of the characters that moved. It's not like, even in a very sort of chunky, clunky way, it's not like someone's arm would rotate and their head would turn or they'd blink, right? There wasn't
sometimes,
character.
Yeah, sometimes.
Oh, there was.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean,
okay, a little bit of character animation.
It was very crude and basic by today's standards, but again, put in context of the year 2001, you know, it was pretty complicated. A lot of it was just pushing images around, but they all had soundtracks. I tried to keep everything right around 30 seconds or under, but I would write music and stuff for them. And I think it was the one for issue 2 or 3. The commercial was all like I had a bunch of friends do like broadcaster news voices, and they were reading like news reports basically about the nanomites crumbling buildings and killing people and stuff. And it was
go back a step. You're
okay.
Writing music?
Oh yeah, I would write music for the background of it and stuff.
Were you also performing it?
Yeah.
How? Where?
Usually in the office or at my house.
On a synthesizer?
I think a lot of that stuff, sometimes I would, well, I remember playing guitar on the James Bond one. A lot of it, I was using loop-based stuff. I was working in Acid at the time. And so I would loop stuff together, or sometimes I would just record stuff with a keyboard and a guitar and a bass and stuff. And I
Do you still have these files?
The audio files? Somewhere. I don't know if they're... I know I've still got the working files for the Flash stuff, but it's Flash stuff, so I'm not really sure that they're useful for anything. I mean, you can still download a Flash player and play stuff. And I think if I had Adobe's Animate, I could still like open and edit that stuff.
I have Adobe Animate. You can send me your files.
I don't know, man.
I'm not going... Okay, fair enough. Part of why I'm asking about what's going into making these is that in the year 2000, my day job was sitting at a computer and animating in Flash, Macromedia Flash.
Well, then you understand what the capabilities of it were at the time.
Yeah, I remember the big thing. We were doing animated shorts for the web for...
Were you putting stuff up on like Newgrounds and stuff?
No. Some of them were for broadcast and cable TV, but I think the second project that I did, it was these really short animated bits for like the Massachusetts Department of Education or something. It was about teacher standards. So it was like teachers were talking to each other, like cartoon teachers in like a cartoon teachers lounge,
like infomercial kind of stuff.
Promotional. I mean, it was like webisodes.
Yeah.
And sort of the most animation that we were doing was like mouth movements and arm movements hinged at the elbow and at the shoulder, and like head turn from left to right, but no in between. Not like head facing right, but no like head facing center and then head facing left. And I forget what the function was in Flash, but there was some keyboard shortcut where you could see sort of how much like bandwidth your sequence would take. Because
my God.
In 2000 the internet was mostly at like 28 and 56K dial-up.
Yeah, most people probably were still at on 56K. Like, I mean,
we had a T1 at the office, and we
Yeah.
had a server because everyone saved their files to the server at the end of the day.
I was on DSL at that point personally, but
We were very aware that for this one particular project that was for the web and not for cable TV, that we needed to keep the files small.
yeah, that
And
was a
it's
constant
like,
concern.
like,
yeah.
like, you know, symbols, not a lot of art, and like not too much movement.
I remember, again, because I was looking at my working files and stuff, and I remember I was looking at the SWF output, and I had to keep everything. I think I was able to squeeze 30 seconds of motion animated graphics, like raster graphics at that for the most part, plus music, you know, between 5 and 700K, which was still insanely huge at the time. Like that still took like 30 seconds to download or something for most people, you know. Which is why I had to have loading screens, because you had to wait, you know, for enough of it to load to be worth, so that, you know, it wouldn't stop in the middle of it while they were downloading it. So I remember having to do that. Sometimes I would convert the comic art into vector art and use it that way, because you could do that with Illustrator back then. You still can with Illustrator, but
Then it's a smaller file, and you can have it pan across the camera or zoom, or you can like redraw an arm or something, like have an arm swing.
yeah, I mean, and sometimes there was one. Again, I'm blanking on issue numbers, but I remember there was one that ended up with Storm Shadow throwing a letter up into the air, and then he threw his dagger at it and spears into the wall. And so this is in the comic book. I think this happens, and it was I think it was supposed to be a photo of somebody that he was going to go assassinate or something. This would have been, I don't know, between issue 3 and issue 10, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's probably that one where he was. There was an issue with him sort of leaning over Hawk on the front cover. I think he was.
I think the
going
issue
in with.
The issue ends with a splash of like his dagger going through the photo or something like that. I can't remember.
You about to tell us how you animated that for a promo?
Right. So I wanted to. I'm like, you know, I'm getting clever. I'm like, okay, so I'm instead of just pushing this picture around, I'm actually going to make it animated. So I had to cut this art apart and then joint his arm so he could throw this thing up, and then this letter goes floating through the air, and then he throws his dagger through it. And it probably took 90% of the time that I needed to actually make the commercial. You know, it was just on that one part, and it was, like I said, I squeezed most of that stuff in between like 500 and 700 and something K every month that we did them, and it was just ridiculous back then. And that was even, I think that was right when Flash MX came out, and they introduced new functions for tweening and stuff like that, which was really handy. So you could automatically just pick keyframes and tween, let the program tween things for you.
Do you remember when you stopped doing these kinds of trailers and animated bits for comics for Devil's Due?
Vaguely. It would have been... I know the last one I did was, I think, there was a Cobra Commander special, wasn't there? That was just like a Cobra Commander issue.
Is that the 13-cent issue, Mark?
I can't remember. This would have been about 06, I'm guessing. 05,
Right.
06?
Yeah, I think that's after the book relaunches. Isn't that a year into?
Yeah, is it called Hunt for Cobra Commander or something like that?
America's Elite?
Oh, maybe that was it. Maybe it was Hunt for Cobra Commander. I can't remember, but the last one I did was, it involved me. I had to do one for that, and I used I can't remember what the term for this is. When you have a foreground, a midground, and a background, and they all move separately in animation. And
Layers?
well, they were layers, but there's a particular word for this that I can't remember. It's
multiplane.
It's basically to make it look more dimensional, so you're not just scrolling an image across the screen. You're moving 3 different things at different rates, so it looks like it just gives a better dimension, you know. So I had to do something like that ended up on like a tattered Cobra flag or something like that, I think. And I'm pretty sure that was the last one I did, but even before that, it was getting spotty because I sort of remember a conversation with Josh where he was basically saying, look, we're a comic company, not an animation company. I need you to concentrate on doing other stuff. Kind of thing, you know, which, I mean, was a bummer for me because the animated stuff was the most fun part of it. You know? So, yeah, there was that. And like I said, I think that was around 06, 05, something like that. It was probably the last one.
Yeah, just looked up. There was a Hunt for Cobra Commander one shot, which was 05. Yeah, 05.
Okay, so yeah, that was probably the last. That was the last time I did one of those because we had launched that superhero line. That was a Devil's Due original property, and I remember doing a couple of those animated things for that, and that would have been in 05 too. But that and that Cobra Commander thing, I think, were the last things I remember animating for Devil's Due. And I don't remember what the original question was. I'm sorry. Oh, we were talking about the online stuff.
Highlights of all of the online stuff from that time.
Yeah. So let's see. I talked about the lens and the file cards and stuff like that. Oh, we would push out a ton of wallpapers. I remember featuring sometimes it was the art we would use for posters. Sometimes it was just like splash pages from the book that I would convert into the right dimensions. Sometimes I would cobble together stuff. The first time. Okay, so after Beck did the Storm Shadow and the Snake Eyes paintings, I took them and put them back to back for a wallpaper, and then we wound up doing a poster of that too, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that originally started because I thought it would look cool as a wallpaper, and I wanted to do sort of a yin and yang thing with it. So that was for online. Running the message board, I got and it's weird to say this, but I guess it's like any office where you get to know people that are there regularly. And then, if you don't see them for 15 years, you can't remember their names. Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of it's like that. There were a lot of people I got to know pretty well through the message board. I remember the guy we wound up hiring as like a military consultant, Phil Coast.
Right, yeah.
Like he was through the message boards. In fact, I think that's how we got Jarlo, was through the message boards originally. We tapped him because he was part of the community or whatever, and he had sent in a sample script for something else, and so because we were doing it's like side GI Joe stories at the time. We did that weirdo snow one. I remember. I love that one. That was great. That was like the weirder GI Joe would get, the more I liked it, kind of thing. But
this is Frontline Icebound with like the Were Yeti thing.
Yeah, and I think the idea of that was the old, Yeti playset. But like, what would that be like if it was a horror story kind of thing?
Huh.
So yeah, I got to know a lot of people, and eventually I tapped somebody from the message board. It was a guy named Tom from Australia, Tom Seal, I think his name was, and he went by Digger online, and I got him to start helping me moderate because I just got tired of doing it all by myself all the time. Plus, he was in a different time zone, so he could look at it when I was asleep, kind of thing. And that was much later, and I think I shut the message boards down in 06, finally. And that was my call. It was just getting to the point where it was just too gripey all the time. There wasn't a lot of positivity going on anymore. And
do you remember making that decision with Blaylock, announcing it to the fans online?
I don't think we made a big deal out of it. I think I just put up a notice and said, on this date I'm going to shut everything down. So, it's been fun, guys, but this is the end of this kind of thing. I ran it past Josh because I couldn't have just done it unilaterally. I don't remember the conversation, but he didn't have a problem with it. Oh, I think at that point he kind of was more worried about it being a liability than an asset. Because I remember early on when we started the message boards, we had long discussions about auto-ban keywords and stuff, like things that just would automatically get blanked out. Things like kind of a loose code of behavior that would get you kicked off right away, stuff like that. Like we were trying to keep it, because we were working with a licensed property, and it was a corporate licensed property on top of it for a kid-friendly family company. So we definitely didn't want people running around using racial slurs or calling people dicks and stuff or whatever.
But you don't remember Hasbro having any problem with the discussion board?
I want to say at one time they called us about something that was on the message board, but this is really vague and I don't remember it. I just remember it being a concern and we addressed it, and then that was done, kind of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of part of the decision to shutter it eventually was maybe the negativity, and how was that dealing with that aspect, and also for the rest of the Devil's Due sort of crew beyond just seeing the negativity coming through, working hard on the project, and then potentially people just then not being as supportive as you would have hoped them to have been. Was that difficult?
Well, when I say negativity, it wasn't just about the Joe book. Like, there was a general thing going on online where people suddenly got really grumpy right around that point, like in the mid 2000s, and it's just one of those things that I noticed as sort of a general zeitgeist. Like, I'm like, you know what? It's just not worth it. All we're doing is getting in fights with each other, you know. But to address your actual question, I think everybody took it pretty well. Like, sometimes it depended on the type of criticism it was, because if somebody's just coming at you like a crank, that sounds weird me saying that. Like, if somebody's just coming across like, with their personal gripes about stuff, not actual criticism of the quality of the book or anything, then you can shrug that off because it's like, well, whatever, And some, a lot of times there were valid criticisms of the book. I mean, it's all relative to what you like, But if somebody said Snake Eyes is getting too much like Wolverine, well, I can agree with that, because I thought that. I'm like, when we started focusing more on Snake Eyes and Snake Eyes' magic ninja powers and swords that can cut through gun blades and stuff, I was getting kind of skeptical at that point, But as a run, we didn't land it every time, but I think we did a lot of decent work. And that was enough, I think, for everybody you roll with the punches, like when somebody's talking bad about you, but as long as you think you're still doing decent stuff, it doesn't hurt so much. If that makes any sense.
And I don't know if I'm misremembering here or what, but was there also some sort of technical issue that led to it being shut down for a while as well?
The message board?
Yeah.
I remember we started on one message board system and then went to another. There might have been an issue with that, like getting the switchover to happen smoothly.
Maybe because I remember it might have coincided with either the switchover where it was sort of down for a little while, or maybe it was more of the shuttering. But I remember that there was a sudden explosion and propagation of loads of different websites and forums, and all of the people who had been on the Devil's Due boards sort of just migrating across all of these multitude of different platforms like Joe Reloaded and Battle Lines, and even Brandon Joa had his own forum and stuff as well. So I think it was all of those additional options that then suddenly opened up, and that sort of more sort of concentrated community kind of just went in all of these different places, different factions, a schism.
I'd be willing to bet that probably happened around 06 in the shutdown, like when I shut it down, because it was a weird thing, honestly. I consciously tried to make it a place for people to talk about more than just G.I. Joe, like our G.I. Joe, I had different sections for stuff talking about, like, if you wanted to talk about toys and whatever. And I guess because of when we launched and the fact that, like we were talking about earlier, Yojo was pretty much like, that was the biggest thing to go to. And then we launched and we became like the second biggest thing to go to. And it was just strange because we were just making a comic book, we weren't necessarily all about all things G.I. Joe. Like, we didn't have anything to do with the toys or like the Palisades stuff, except that we knew the Palisades guys, but we weren't influencing what they put out or anything, we certainly weren't telling Hasbro what to do because they didn't like us anyway, for the most part.
Can you talk about that?
I mean, yeah, I guess. I don't know how much more I could add than what like Tim or Josh said. Basically, we got the license through a bunch of smoke and mirrors, and that's fine because it paid dividends. It's not like we screwed it up or anything, especially considering that they have disavowed the entire run anyway. But yeah, at the time, there was another person that they wound up hiring to put in charge of the Joe department in-house. But before that, he was trying to get the license. And I suspect he was pissed off because we got it instead of him. And I think that was just a matter of timing. I don't even know if it wouldn't. I don't even think that had anything to do with quality of pitches or anything. I think we just got there before he did, you know. But essentially, he just made our lives really hard. Like, he made working with Hasbro really hard. And there were just a lot of times when we'd pitch something that we thought was a good idea, and they just wouldn't go for it for nothing, you know. And I think they, again, up to that point, the 3 3/4 stuff and the 80s era cartoon stuff was secondary for them. You know, I think they were really trying to revive the 12-inch line and the older idea of G.I. Joe. That was more traditionally like a military kind of thing where, come on, frankly, the 80s G.I. Joe, they were superheroes that, like Batman. You know, it's not like they were regular army kind of thing. Like, it wasn't like you were reading the Nam or something like that, you know. They were basically grounded superheroes. Colorful costumes, everybody with their own individual thing going on. Stuff like that. And I just, the guy that didn't like us, I think he was wanting to revive the 80s stuff again, more so than the 60s stuff. But I don't think he was wanting to do it like we were doing it, because we were incorporating stuff from the cartoons. Because we liked it all, you know. We liked the toys, we liked the cartoons, we liked the original comic run and stuff like that. We were just taking everything we liked and putting it in the book, kind of thing. You know, like I said, if we could have got the Robo-Skull in there, we would have got the Robo-Skull in there. But yeah, it was just really kind of weird and difficult at times to work with them. They would reject stuff out of hand a lot, it seemed like. Stuff that otherwise probably would have done okay. And I really don't know. It felt personal, I think, because it didn't make sense from a business standpoint. Because we were making them money on a thing that they weren't making money on before that, you know. So to me, in my head, I'm like, well, what's the problem? You know, as long as once we stop making you money, that's a problem, you know.
Do you remember any things that were rejected out of hand? Bigger things, smaller things?
Specifically, I mean, I remember the Kirkman thing that they didn't want to do.
Tell us about that.
I don't know any more about it than what Tim and Josh mentioned.
Okay.
I just remember it happening. Like, it could have been a thing, and it wasn't, you know. And it all came down to, I think, you know, them not wanting it to happen. I'm kind of surprised in retrospect that they let some of the weirder frontline stuff happen. Like that ice story and stuff like that. Of course, I guess that was still early on. We had more leeway early on, I remember. Okay, it started getting tighter as it went. And I think I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, this was, like 15 years ago for me, or more. It's been like 14 years since the last issue DDP published, right? I guess 2008, I think was the last year we put anything out. So a lot of this is just really hazy. So take it all with a grain of salt. But it almost felt like, you know, when somebody tries to, they don't want to out and out tell you to go away, so they make themselves so irritating to you that you go away on your own. You know? In retrospect, it kind of feels like that. Like they were trying to make it unpleasant for us so that we would eventually just go away, I think. And when that didn't work, they just, you know, gave the license to somebody else. You know, whether IDW actually bid more or not, I don't know. But I think it was out of our hands no matter what. Even if we would have bid higher than somebody else, I think they were ready to put it in somebody else's hands. So there's that. Kind of weird though, thinking back on it.
And then there was a change of the guard at Hasbro almost immediately after I think that decision was made. Well, so IDW had to deal with a different set of people, which might have made things easier for them.
It makes me wonder though if we could have outlived those people by that little margin if we would have still had the license. You know?
Could be.
But and that's just the vagaries of how that stuff works, you know, especially when you're dealing with a corporate where people come and go so fast. And again, when you got somebody working someplace that kind of has a grudge going on, like what makes sense from a business standpoint may not be the thing that actually happens, you know? Because I don't, you know, or I guess disagreements in vision even, like where they wanted to take the brand versus what we were doing with it. because they started. I mean, we were doing like the Sigma 6 comics and stuff too when they launched Outline. Which, if it wasn't G.I. Joe, I think I would have liked Sigma 6 a lot more because that toy line was actually pretty neat.
That's an interesting take on it.
It's just that calling it G.I. Joe kind of, well, this is kind of a boring G.I. Joe because everybody's costumes were kind of boring. Like, I mean, they looked neat for themselves, but they didn't look cool for G.I. Joe stuff. Does that make sense?
It was sort of simultaneously too close to the existing G.I. Joe, but also not different enough.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, what did we do? We did that Reloaded thing where we put everybody in black costumes or whatever. And I remember disagreeing with that decision pretty vocally in the office when they were being designed, because I'm like, this is dumb. This is just a military book. It's not G.I. Joe, you know. Because I mean, there's certain characteristics of G.I. Joe that make it that, and that make it the '80s Joe anyway. Because again, you can go back to the '60s stuff, and that was more military based, but that's not what we were basing our stuff on. So, like, to me, any step towards trying to make it less colorful, less superhero-y is like a bad move, you know. But I wasn't the one making the calls, so there you go. I like the toy line for Sigma 6 though, because I thought the vehicles were neat. And the figures themselves, like the design and construction of them was pretty neat. Everything was kind of huge, though. I remember that. It was like playing with the 12-inch toys. But they weren't quite really. They were like 6 or 7 inches, I think.
Definitely a line that has its fans. I didn't connect with it at the time, but I didn't actually see any of it in person at the time either, because I was so no one was stocking it over here. So
that makes sense. Yeah, we had them. Like, they would send samples to us, so we'd have reference in that. So we had them around the office and got to play with them and stuff. That was something about our office, is we had lots and lots of toys lying around, because we all had toys anyway, like, besides G.I. Joe stuff, you know? So we'd bring our toys in and line the cubicle walls with them, and people would pick them up and play with them, and pick them up for reference for stuff, or just move them around and have them in different positions, you know?
I was just going to say, talking about the office and sort of the environment there. You said that you were in with Tim and Mike, so Tim Seeley, Mike Norton, and you've continued to be professionally involved with them pretty much ever since. It looks like.
I mean, like, I still talk to Mike. Well, Mike usually I talk to weekly, except for recently because my work schedule has just been so crazy. I've been out of it. But I still talk to Mike a lot. I work with Tim on stuff. I still letter like Hackslash books when they come out and various other things. I letter 2 books for him right now that are coming out through Vault. So, I still hear from him pretty regularly. Not like it was when we were all together, but still in touch and that. And then Josh, not so much. I see him at conventions and stuff, and, that's about it really these days. Sean Dove, I still talk to because he's in the studio with Mike. He was part of the art department in the later part of the Devil's Due era.
Yeah, I remember seeing Sean Dove's name in the credits. It wasn't. I don't think it was ever particularly clear from the credits what his role was. What sort of role did he have at Devil's Due?
By the end, he was the art director. Originally came in as an intern, I think, and then he got hired on as part of the art department. Just working with the art director for various things, including like prepping files for print and stuff like that, production stuff. And then, like I said, eventually, I think by the last issues of America Elite, and I don't remember how long or anything, but he was actually the art director at the time. He did a lot of the design work for the books,
right?
Like the inner stuff, like the IFCs and the stuff like that.
Sorry, what's an IFC?
Oh, inside front cover.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Can you talk about lettering, becoming a comic book letterer? Because that's a particular. It's like anyone can letter who has the software, but lettering is a skilled art form because you have to be a designer and have a sense of typography.
Yeah, it's a bit of design work and kind of, depending on how far you're going into it as a letterer, sometimes there's actual like art involved because you have to draw the forms. I became a letterer accidentally. I had lettered before formally becoming a letterer. Like I said, sometimes I would letter stuff like in the early days of Devil's Due. Like if we had to split a book up to get it done, like I would do part of it or something. And I had lettered we did a collection of Trauma stories based in the Trauma movie universe. And I had done a story in there where I wrote and lettered it. And that was the first thing I probably actually had credit for, I think, lettering. And that would have been around 06-ish, I guess. And then once I got laid off from Devil's Due, and they moved to their third offices.
Wait, sorry, can I pause? Can you go back even earlier? So who taught you to letter? How do you connect it with like working in Macromedia Flash, because you're already sitting at a computer doing creative stuff?
Well, I mean, okay, so I need to define comic book lettering as sort of a subset of the overall art of lettering. If you get, because I mean, there's different kinds of like
a sign painter.
Sign painters or hand lettering or logo designers do stuff with letters and stuff, you know. So it's again, it's in the design field. I had been working with letters and stuff off and on, working with, you know, Flash and stuff. Not comic book lettering, but working with letter forms. And sometimes I would design logos for stuff, bands and things like that. I remember designing a Cobra La logo for a poster we did. Yeah, it was just a letter form logo, but it was like all kind of organic-y looking with veins and stuff in it, I remember. So yeah, I'd been working with letters up to that point. Nobody really taught me. Like I didn't go to like a lettering school or have a lettering mentor per se. When I finally took up the lettering of comics, I looked at online resources for stuff, digital webbing and stuff like that, where they had forums with people talking about working. I got the Comic Craft book, and I already had like the Marvel and DC books that had lettering sections in them. But I'm trying to remember. I think those mostly dealt with hand lettering, how to space and use an Eames guide and stuff like that, which I still have an Eames guide. But so I was self-taught with the help of online information and what books there were available. That's how I got into it, and also having like I already had design background, so all the way going back to, because I actually did some hand lettering back in high school because I was in a commercial art program in my last 2 years of high school that taught me how to do like ad layouts, and the school I was in there was right on the cusp of that, where things started switching to computer stuff and digital stuff. So I was taught more traditional methods, hand methods of stuff, using like Rubylith and Zipatone and stuff like that, and having to, you know, if you wanted lettering, you drew the lettering. You didn't have a computer and print it out, kind of thing. You know.
Did you design any logos for Devil's Due?
I did. Like I said, I did that Cobra La thing we did for the poster, but I don't think that ever got used anywhere other than that.
I mean, like maybe not Voltron or G.I. Joe, but any of the Aftermath stuff or any of the...
I think most of that was actually Sean and... Oh, why am I blanking on the guy who was the graphic designer at the time? Evan Salt. Which, okay. Interesting sidebar on that, he was the drummer for a band called Harvey Danger in the 90s.
Huh.
Who had a flagpole sitter, was like their
flagpole sitter, yeah.
Yeah, he was the drummer in that video and stuff, you know. But he wound up being our art director. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I would do things. I don't think I did anything that was on like the books. I did redesign the Voltron logo because I didn't like the different sizes of the O's, I remember. And that was the logo we used. So I think I did do the Voltron logo, or an updated version of the Voltron logo.
Did you get permission? Did you just do it?
I think we just did it. I don't think they ever said anything about it. And I'm kind of think in later Voltron cartoons they might have used it because it didn't have that. The original Voltron logo, the two O's were different sizes, and there was some other sort of thing in there that made it feel real unbalanced to me. So when we were working on it, and I think I might have done this logo up early on, like right when we were pitching it or something, even because I was getting the pitch materials together. I was just like, I don't like this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to fix it. So I did it, and I think that's just what we started using from then on.
This reminds me of the story where Ryan Hughes, the British designer who's done so many comic book logos and also like the 2013 Ninja Turtles logo.
Yeah.
he was hired to redesign the Marvel logo, I think 15 years ago, just like white letters in the red rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
And all he did was very slightly adjust all the curves and angles because they were off.
Right.
But also that it's, who's the designer? Who's the famous designer in the 70s? He was going to redesign the Superman logo. And he's like, for DC, and he's like, nope, it's perfect.
I think I remember that story, but I can't remember who the designer was. It probably wasn't Saul Bass. But
I think it is. Anyway, listeners, if you're interested in a lot more information on comic book logos, go to the website of comic book letterer and logo designer Todd Klein.
Yeah,
lots of great stuff you can nerd out on there.
He's got a wealth of information. Yeah.
Speaking of nerding out, since we're talking about letter forms and lettering and things that aren't G.I. Joe, Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters.
Yeah.
What's it like lettering a book with... All right, so Chris Somney's sound effects are always, mostly drawn as part of the art?
On that book, yeah, they're all baked in the art. Yeah.
Okay.
And that book, I don't want to say this, is really easy because sometimes there are pages and pages of nothing but art. So, I come in on a 22-page book, I might letter 10 of them or something like that, so, and even those 10 don't have a lot of stuff in them.
I can bring this back to G.I. Joe. Hey, everyone, remember, there is a letterer for issue 21, Silent Interlude of G.I. Joe, because there's lettering on page 1.
Yeah. Man, I remember, this is probably everybody's story when you bring up that issue, but yeah, I just remember getting that issue and just being like, what the hell? This is awesome. Probably in that order. First was confusion, and then, my eyes probably just got real big, and I'm like, this is awesome.
Fortunately, the cover gives you a hint.
Well, yeah.
There's also lettering on Destro's monitor as well.
Ah, there you go. And apparently that was all accidental. That wasn't supposed to be a silent issue.
Yes, we have spoken to Hama, and he is on the record about where that comes from. Mark, I'm not sure if the lettering on Destro's helmet on the monitor, I think that might be...
Oh, it might be drawn.
I think that might be in the art and not in the lettering, because Hama, for breaking down that issue, Hama had done lettering.
Yeah.
And did do a little lettering after that for an issue of Conan or something.
Yeah.
Crank, what is the end of the story for you and Devil's Due?
How do you mean? Just how it all came down at the end?
Yeah. How what was happening at the end, and what did you do, and where did you go?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I have to think, because sometimes I remember stuff, but I don't remember it in the right order. Especially when it was chaotic, like it was towards the end there. Because I just remember...
here's a different question. How was it chaotic?
Well, okay, so I think we knew that we weren't going to get the license back. So it's not like we were completely shocked when it came down to time to renew it, and we couldn't. But we had a bit of a scramble there, because at the same time we had kind of overextended ourselves, I think, as a company. We were trying to launch too many different things, throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall to see what would stick. And that was fine as long as we had a steady income off of stuff. And we had a couple of things. It wasn't just G.I. Joe, because, we were doing Family Guy and stuff like that too. But, and there was something weird where Devil's Due splintered off into a couple of different sub-companies. I can't remember exactly what was going on with that. There was a sister company called Kunoichi, which was supposed to be more of an advertising development kind of thing, or IP development kind of thing. Something like that. And I don't remember. They were a separate company, but part of us used our resources and were staffed in our offices, as well as us. So it was kind of a weird thing there towards the end. But so anyway, when G.I. Joe, when we knew, finally, when it was just okay, we're going to lose this. We're not going to have this as our big money maker anymore, our steady money maker. Josh made the decision to move into a smaller office and downsize the employees and stuff. So I remember those last days, there was a lot of... God, we threw away a shit ton of comic stock, I remember. Because there wasn't any space for it at the new offices that they were moving to.
You mean stuff you might have sold through the website, actual printed issues?
Right, like back issues of stuff. I remember a lot of that just got thrown straight in the dumpster because couldn't move it anywhere, you know. I think employees wound up with stuff that was getting pitched if they wanted it, kind of stuff, you know. Like I had chairs, like just chairs from our office or our conference room, because they were going to get thrown out, and they were, you know, anybody want them? I'm like, sure, I'll take them. I can use them in the dining room or whatever, stuff like that, you know. And it was just kind of chaos. And then between that and the move, and even though I had gotten laid off, I was retained as a contractor for a period to help with the setting up the new network and stuff at the new offices, and to kind of transition stuff over. Because at that point, basically, if it was techie stuff in there, I was the one doing it. I was helping set up the phones, keeping the phones, because we had like a weird high-end digital phone system kind of thing, you know. Yeah, if it was techie, I was doing it by the end, and there was just so much going on. And once I got laid off, I spent some time helping them switch over at the other office, and that's how I got into lettering, actually, because the sister company, partner company, that Kunoichi or whatever, they would do things like get to organize vanity comic book things. And by vanity, I just mean somebody that's doing it for their own shits and giggles. And they put together this book called Pogrom, and they need a letter. I happened to be in the office that day, and they're like, "Who are you going to call?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'll do it," because I just happened to be there, you know. And I was looking for a way. I knew I was really tired of IT at the time. I was just burnt out. I didn't want to deal with websites anymore, because they're thankless, never-ending jobs. Like, a website is never done, you know. And I was just tired of it, and I was looking to make a change, and so I volunteered to letter this comic book, and that's how I got that. And then, because I was there, that's how I wound up lettering the last few issues of G.I. Joe, and I think I lettered one of the Storm Shadow issues, the miniseries Hama was working on. Yeah, I think I did like issue 5 or something like that. Yeah, so and then I started lettering Hackslash, and that's how I got rolling. But even at that, like in that early period, Chicago was a super expensive place to live. It might not be the most expensive place to live in the States, but it's really high. And I was paying like and this is in 2007. I was paying like $900 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment kind of thing. I didn't want to get roommates because I had some pretty bad experiences just a few years prior with the roommates. And I just realized that I liked Chicago. I used to go visit Chicago a lot before I moved there, especially back in my teens. We'd hop in a van, drive from Cincinnati, because it's only like 3.5, 4 hours away or something like that from Cincinnati. So, we'd hop in a van and go to Chicago for a weekend, sleep in the van, and just hang out and stuff. And so I was pretty familiar with Chicago already. Turned out I wasn't so good at living there. So once I got laid off, and even though I was doing the lettering thing, there wasn't enough of that to be enough income to live in Chicago right away at that time. And my lease was coming up on my apartment. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going back to Cincinnati, because I can live there for like a third of the price. And as long as I've got internet, it doesn't matter where I live. I can do my work. So that all happened around 07, 08 then. So I was back here, I think, when I was still lettering, or when I was lettering G.I. Joe issues. I'm pretty sure. Right. I don't know if that actually answered your question, though. I keep saying that today, but
it did.
Yeah, and it was just very weird there at the end, because at that point I had been working with Josh and working on G.I. Joe stuff since 2000. So that was already like 7 years of my life that I had been doing this stuff. And I'm like, and then it all just kind of like, poof, went away. So, and we had a bunch of employees at that time. I'm trying to remember who all was there, because we had like 2 editors, and we had an in-house letterer. We had another art guy. We had the art director. We had a secondary art position. Tim was there doing whatever he was doing at the time, because he had different roles as the company evolved as well. Josh, Susan, we had a couple of people working the web store stuff, And then, again, we had those other people that shared the office space with us that were part of that sister company. So it went from being like a small DIY, scrappy group of people that spent all their time together to being like a regular office, but bigger. Or not bigger than a regular office, but bigger than what we were and more like a regular office kind of thing. And so trying to get all that organized, moved over into a smaller new space that, also while dealing with the emotional baggage of getting laid off and realizing that, this happy family you've had for several years isn't going to be around anymore. That was just all kind of very strange at the end.
I don't have it to hand, but your own podcast has been going quite a long time. I want to say from memory that it dates back to probably a similar time as when you left Devil's Due. Is that right?
Prior, we started at the end of 2005.
Wow. So you're an early adopter again. You're sort of a pioneer of podcasting.
I guess we were one of the first comic book related podcasts. I remember there were a couple around. Word Balloon launched just before us. John Suntress, that dude's a great guy. We hung out with him a lot in Chicago. There was Comic Geek Speak was another one. They had been around for a while. And then we were trying to be more like, there was a group of comic artists in Canada, I think, or something. I can't remember what that was, but they had a brief, short-lived podcast. And we were trying to be more like them, where it was just casual, not necessarily focused on any certain topics, just kind of comic book
hanging out,
chat. Right. And ours devolved into it's basically just how I keep up with my Chicago people, because I don't get to see them anymore, so I talk to them weekly if I can.
If you want to talk to two guys about G.I. Joe on your podcast, Crank, I know.
Really?
Two guys who would.
I don't think that would help your numbers any. I'll be honest. I know.
Mark, we're off the hook.
Yeah, I know there are people that listen to our podcast, because occasionally they write in, but like we don't really have any specific focus. And as far as a podcast goes, we're like the Seinfeld, I guess, of podcasts. We don't have a point, which is fine for us. Like, we don't care, but it means that, we don't really rank very well anywhere. We don't retain. You have to be looking for something like us to actually want to listen to us more than once, kind of thing.
I guess your main measure of success is that you're talking to your friends regularly.
Yeah. I figure if I'm going to talk to them anyway, I might as well keep the podcast going. Because we used to be more like a standard thing where we had segments of the show. We actually had the show divided up into spots, and we'd talk about different subjects on things. We'd plan it out ahead of time. Now it's just stream of consciousness for an hour, and that's fine. Like,
you limit yourselves to an hour. What a great idea.
We try to. It depends. Sometimes we've gone for like 2 hours at a time. Sometimes we've gone for like 48 minutes and stopped because we were just like, that's all we got to talk about right now. But yeah, I used to be a lot better at editing, where I would actually edit. I'd trim out all my ums and yas and trim out pauses, uncomfortable pauses, and I would, that would go, right? And if we were rambling about something, I would definitely edit things down to make them more concise, and whatever I could do, I would, in the early days, I actually edited stuff. Now I trim off the front and back to, and then I usually do a little bit of time stretching to make it fit an even time. And that's all I do. I don't.
Mark, I think you should cut this part where Crank is talking about his fine tuning, no longer fine tuning his editing, because our listeners might realize that if you are doing less of it, then they'll be disappointed. Anyway.
Well, I spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to at least hone down the uncomfortable pauses and the and the tripping over the words, even if a lot of the content gets left in. But that's because it's all solid gold.
Just before we got on together, I was photoshopping a photograph of me holding some Devil's Due G.I. Joe comics, and I'll use that as the promotional image when in a couple days on Facebook I post a link to the episode where we're reading those issues, and I spent a lot of time photoshopping those photos because invariably we take the photo of me standing in front of my refrigerator and I'm not near a light, and like it's like the exposure on half of my face is good, but the covers are too dark, so I lassoed those in Photoshop and
whole bunch
you know,
of dodging and
histogram
burning and curves.
you know, it's like, well, I'm smiling and my teeth don't look very bright. Maybe I should whiten my teeth.
So I think what we're saying, the division of labor here is that I organize the podcasts, make sure that they're recorded, download and edit them, upload them, promote them, and then Tim takes a photo of himself and then edits that for a week.
If you were where I was, you could definitely be in the photo with me.
Thank you.
You could always Photoshop them into the photo with you, you know.
I'm already spending so much time photoshopping myself.
Right. Understood.
So nowadays, Crank, is lettering, is that a full-time gig, or have you got all sorts of multitudes of side hustles along the way as well?
Lettering's my main moneymaker. I do things occasionally like design work time to time. Kind of got out of doing like logos for other people because I found them frustrating. That kind of design work kind of tends to drag on a bit, especially if the client doesn't know. They only know they don't want what you're showing them, but they don't know what they do want, kind of thing.
I can speak from firsthand experience on this. We hired a wonderful designer to redo the logo for my store, and I loved everything he had done, and I couldn't wait to work with him. And he sent a batch of amazing new logos for my comic book store, and none of them worked. They were all amazing. They just didn't fit. And he did a second batch and a third batch, and I showed them to a couple trusted allies, and they all said, "These look great. These don't quite fit." And it turned out I was that client who didn't want to completely redo it. I just wanted like a small revision to the existing logo. So a year later, I found a different designer and I said, "I don't know what I want, but this is what the old logo is. Maybe you can do something with it." And he did a small revision to the original logo. And I thought, that's what I always wanted.
Yeah, sometimes that's all it takes, you know?
Just change the O a bit and you'll be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two O's in Hub Comics were different sizes, and so I had this new designer. And interestingly, all the like Netflix animated specials featuring the Hub Comics logo have been using that new. Never mind, it's a call. It's a callback.
Yeah, for me, that's why I found that frustrating. I even though I was trained back in high school to do like when you approach a design project, you're supposed to do like 20 thumbnails and. Start eliminating stuff and then do roughs on the 10 you've got left and then start eliminating stuff. And I'm like, man, look, no, if I got an idea, I got an idea. This is what I'm going to do. If you don't like it, you only have to use it and we're done. But like most clients don't like that approach. So now I just do, if I do logo stuff, it's just for myself or like personal projects. People I know pretty well and kind of know what they want, you know.
My friend draws comics for publishers and learned this early on. If he's doing a cover, he would send in 4 thumbnails, and invariably the editor would choose the least interesting thumbnail. So he started to send 3, and then he sort of shifted to trying to send 2, and tries to just send 1 now, like the good one, or the one that he wants to draw.
That was the other thing, is that you learn early on, don't ever include anything that you don't think you might want to actually be happy with putting your name on, because invariably the client is going to pick the one you dislike the most, and that gets frustrating after a while. So yeah, I guess that all just goes to say I don't do a whole lot of commercial design work anymore. Mostly it's just because I know what to expect out of lettering, kind of.
And how many books have you typically got on the go?
Oh man, last year just about killed me. I'm still like I haven't gotten enough sleep after that. And that was my fault. I overbooked. So that was an abnormal year. I do a few a week, probably a couple a week at least. It depends on the time of the year. Usually January and February are pretty slow, I think, because there's a rush at the end of the prior year to get things done into the presses before everything shuts down for the holidays and whatnot. And I think that affects like the scheduling, like because there's already stuff that's going to be coming out in those months, so they don't necessarily need things to be lettered in those months. So yeah, it varies. There's no real set thing. Usually I'm doing at least 1 book a week, sometimes 3 or 4. And that translates to, I don't know, maybe half a dozen to 12 titles a month sometimes. And then, that depends on if I'm working on an OGN or something. That's a whole different thing too, because I did like 3, 4. I did I did multiple OGNs on top of like my regular monthly work last year, which was part of my mistake. But OGNs are weird because like when you're doing a monthly book, you can go, oh, well, I've got this many issues out, or I've got all these titles out. But then for when you're going straight to an OGN, you're just doing 120 pages for one thing, kind of. So it doesn't feel like it weighs as much from from an impressive standpoint. Well, it's just one title versus like all these other titles that I've done, even though it's a 200-page book or whatever.
Yeah, it's one credit on your resume.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I went back and I actually looked at, because I was looking at old files again. I looked at the stuff I did, the G.I. Joe books I lettered. Yeah, man, that was rough.
Were you not a good letterer in 2005? Is that what you're saying? You've only gotten better.
I've definitely gotten tighter. It's not the worst lettering I've ever seen, honestly, even though it was pretty rough. But I can definitely, I look back on it now, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't do that now. That wouldn't slide.
Okay, so since we've gotten a little bit into the nerdy weeds about lettering and design, what makes good lettering? What makes not good lettering?
That's again subjective, but I would say something that I would tell anybody is to be consistent about what you're doing.
Can you give an example? Because that's for someone who's listening to this podcast, but doesn't really notice lettering. Maybe doesn't even notice good lettering or bad lettering.
Okay, well, if they're listening to this podcast, they're probably reading G.I. Joe, right? Or they might be revisiting The Devil's Due G.I. Joe, and so they might see the books I did. We'll use those as examples. You can tell, like my word stacks, which is just how the lines of text form from top to bottom.
You mean like four words on the top line, 5 on the next, 5 on the next, 4 on the bottom, if it's 4 lines, like that kind of thing?
Right. My basic word stacks, which is that, the way you just explained it, aren't terrible in there, I don't think. I didn't leave any kind of weird gaps. Like sometimes you'll see in the middle line will be a lot shorter than the lines above and below it, and it'll leave these parking spots kind of in there. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes that just looks really weird, but I didn't really have too much of that. My main problems on those were my tail widths were very inconsistent, where the tail meets the balloon. Some people like fat tails, some people like the really skinny tails, some like them more straight than curved, et cetera, et cetera. And that's fine, but you kind of got to stay consistent with it whatever your style is. It's not style if it's different from balloon to balloon. It's just sloppy. The space between the letters and the balloons, some balloons are tighter than others. So that was just real inconsistent. Stuff like that mostly. Some of it was placement, where I was looking at it and like I actually could have laid that out better, kind of thing. So yeah, if you're looking at those last issues of America's Elite, that's me lettering, and that's me not really great at it. It's competent enough. I don't think it looks terrible. Like it doesn't throw you out of the book, but it's definitely not good. But of course, at that point, that was me starting the letter.
Right. Do you have favorite letterers in comics?
More designy people, probably. Like,
do you have favorite designers?
Like we were talking about Ryan Hughes. He's really good. I really like Russ Wooten.
If anyone's wondering how you spell Ryan Hughes, that's R-I-A-N.
Right. Russ Wooten is really good. He was the original letterer on Walking Dead and stuff. From a design standpoint, like I really like Nate Piekos. He does a lot of stuff for
like Allred.
Yeah, Allred and Dark Horse and stuff like that. And he's also like one of the 2 major comic book font designers.
Is he Blambot?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he also just put out a book last year on a new guide to lettering book.
We have it at my store.
Ah.
And in fact, I saw someone carrying it around in my store, and I sort of intercepted, and I said, "Oh, what a great book. Do you know about this?" And the person said, it was something like, "Oh, I'm in a fine arts program and I'm taking a painting class, and this looked really interesting." And very nicely, I talked this person out of buying the book because it was not at all what this person needed.
Oh, right.
It's like, oh, this is about like design and computer lettering for comic books.
Right.
It's like, oh, but on another occasion, someone did buy that book it's like, do you have a book on lettering? Yes, we do. Because the Comic Craft one is out of print, and the DC Comics Guide, that one is out of print.
Yeah, even if that Comic Craft one were still in print, it's pretty dated now. I revisited it last year after I got done reading Nate's book, because I was just curious to like just see how that Comic Craft one held up, and it's really dated. Just the techniques and stuff. I mean, it came out in mid 2000s, you know.
Yeah. Also, it's like 48 or 64 pages. It's like a prestige format special. So like it is technically a book, but it's not a like hefty book you hold in your hand with a spine you can see from afar.
Yeah, they were definitely given basically just outlining the basics of it. I'm trying to think of who else. Like I said, Nate's, besides being a good letterer, like he's a good designer as well. So is Russ Wooten, because he generally designs a lot of comic book covers and stuff, like the cover dressing, like the actual design of the cover.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the classic people, like we were talking about Todd Klein. Ben Oda was an old comic letterer. He was really good. John Workman, of course.
Yeah.
Man, and I mean, most of my contemporaries that are working on mainstream books right now, I can't think of any of them that are bad.
This is a good observation, because when coloring met computers in comic books in the early 90s,
mm-hmm.
anyone who could figure out Photoshop could color a comic book, and it didn't mean that anyone should.
Right. Some of that looked terrible.
And the same thing was true with lettering. You know, it's like the printing press gets invented a few centuries ago, and now anyone with paper and ink can be a published author, but maybe not everyone should be. And there's not even a minimum level. There's sort of there's a median level of skill and style across all of the big publishers and most of the like medium publishers and plenty of the small publishers in comics, where a lot of books just look good.
Yeah.
You know, the spine, the logo, the dressing, the inside front cover where the credits are, you know, any sort of extra stuff in the back, whether it's an issue or a book. So one could spend a long time just listing designers and letterers who are doing great work now.
Sure. I still see some wonky stuff here and there, but I don't generally see wonky stuff from people who do it regularly, I guess. Is how I'm trying to say this. Like the people who actually do more than one or two books a year or something, you know?
Right. There are a couple publishers every month that go through previews, the Diamond catalog. And there are a couple publishers where like the publishers are not in the back half of previews, but the medium and big publishers are designing their own pages in previews and then handing a file over to Diamond to actually publish previews. And
oh yeah, I remember Sean Dove was responsible for all of our previews designed. Okay.
And again, to our listeners, I mean the catalog that's called previews. I don't mean the generic notion of a preview. And there are a couple publishers where their layouts in previews are really busy and crowded. And every month that's my sort of first impression of them. And I always think, I'm a little less excited about ordering these books, or maybe I'm not going to order any of these books. And there's a chicken and egg thing here, because they may not sell. But, you know, like the design ethos of this publisher is like, too much is never enough. And, you know, like lots of text and it's very small, and like lots of images crammed together and lots of different fonts.
Presentation counts, you know?
Yeah. And I think like I was always struck, you know, like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years into Image, I was always struck by how different Top Cow's design looked than the other of the 6 Image houses. Like there was so much like fancy to like inside front covers at Top Cow, like font treatment. And there was a lot of like, I don't want to say gilded, but there was a sense of like things could be like shiny and gold and sort of fancy. And some of that still sticks around 20 years later. And this is not good or bad. It's just like really interesting to me.
I remember ours, back in the aughts, ours were basically designed like around what our company looked like, our company materials kind of thing.
What do you mean?
You know, like when we would do Devils do presentations of stuff, like our letterheads, business cards,
Right.
logo work, stuff like that. So our previews were all based around that kind of thing, as I recall, anyway.
Like
It's
a
been a
consistent
while.
branding approach.
Sure.
Since we mentioned Aftermath, I have very much appreciated. So in the issues of G.I. Joe we've been reading recently, we are seeing ads for the Aftermath books, even though they didn't last very long.
Yeah.
And I very much appreciate how the Aftermath logo is so similar to the Devil's Due logo.
Yeah.
But it's its own thing, and it says its own thing about what it is. But it's still a circular shape with red and black and white, and it still reads graphically, and I think that's just neat.
I think that was the intent, to just make it recognizable as part of our line of stuff, our brand of stuff, but still not just branded as Devil's Due kind of thing. I just remembered something else because we were talking about logos earlier. So when we did the first Joe Transformers crossover, there was that Decepticon Cobra logo, that combo.
Oh yeah, and that's on the back cover of a bunch of the issues.
Yeah, and for a lot, I just saw one last year, but for a number of years after that came out, man, I saw that sticker on so many cars. It was crazy. It was just all over the place. But that was Mike Norton designed that, which I don't think he ever got actual credit for that. But yeah, that was a Mike Norton thing. He came up with that, and it seems so simple in retrospect. Like, oh well, let's just put the Cobra logo in there, or actually, I think it was the Cobra logo with the Decepticon logo inside the mouth. Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really effective.
I'm curious if these stickers that you're seeing on cars for a long time, if those are official stickers that Devil's Due licensed and sold and made money on.
Oh, probably not. No.
Bootlegs, because part of the story of Playlock before Devil's Due is working at a company that was licensing shirts and not licensing shirts.
Taste of his own medicine.
Here's another funny logo thing. But to answer your question, yeah, they were probably all bootlegs. I either that or I don't know. I mean, I guess technically it was the property of Hasbro, so they could have farmed out the material to whoever was licensing their stickers or whatever.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good point.
That's entirely possible too. I just remember, like I said, for a number of years, I saw that sticker all over the place, and then not so much, but I still see it every now and then, and I think about it. I'm like, Mike did that. Another funny logo thing. So, of course, when you're doing branding stuff, it's important that you've got style guides, so you can properly represent the material, right? And logos and stuff are supposed to be reproduced as they are, because logos are trademarked, copyrighted, both? No, trademarked. A logo is like a reserved thing and stuff like that, I think. In a case of early G.I. Joe from the pitch stuff, we all we had was we didn't have materials that came straight from Hasbro. We didn't have a style guide or a series Bible or anything like that. So we were, if we needed stuff, we would just make it up ourselves. And early on with the pitch stuff, I didn't have a proper Cobra logo, so I made my own, right? But I never liked how the teeth were separate from the top of the mouth in the official logo, because you've got your open mouth, and then there's a line between that and like where I guess the lip and the teeth, top of the teeth. So I had closed that up and made the teeth more pointy and stuff. Basically just, and I think I did something different with the eyes and stuff too. I made it look more sinister or something in my head, But Hasbro, no, they weren't having any of that. Like once we actually started going, like anything that was official had to have the correct logo on there. But still, you would see stuff pop up that was more like the way I did it. And I don't know. I mean, that was never an official thing, but because I was looking at something. There's the cover that's got like Cobra Commander and Storm Shadow on the front. It's like majorly yellow background, I think. Something in the early issues.
Yeah.
It was something Steve Kurth, I think, drew the cover for. And if you look at the logo on his chest, it's that gap's closed up too and stuff. Which I don't know if Hasbro just didn't notice or what, but they probably would have called that, I think, because it's not like the correct logo, But they were always really, or usually pretty on the ball about that, because it's branding kind of thing, I just always think it's funny because I had made up my own. I was working as a printer at the time when I first made up my logo for personal use, And so I had printed up a bunch of just Cobra stickers myself. I never sold them or anything. I think I just gave them to people. I used one of them for something, Halloween costume. I can't remember. But yeah, that's just one of those weird memories, G.I. Joe memories.
I thought when you mentioned Transformers versus G.I. Joe, I thought you were going to tell us that you were the person who designed the Versus, the VS, for that logo treatment on the cover of that first miniseries.
I wish. That was probably Mike too, actually.
Okay.
Because he was the art director at the time,
Right?
Or co-art director. We had titles, I guess, from the get-go, sort of, but I don't really remember them. It was more like we just had jobs, because again, we kind of took on multiple things early on. I don't really remember people having specific titles until later, like the second office space, and when we got, like I said, we got a little more corporate-y structured kind of thing.
The cover that you're talking about is issue 6, which is a Mike Zeck cover with Cobra Commander on the front, Storm Shadow jumping behind, and kind of like orangey, yellowy background. And it's got the Cobra Commander chest logo, and actually on his head and on Storm Shadow behind it. It's all got an integrated, fangs on the Cobra. It's not the official sort of Hasbro Cobra logo.
Yeah, I forgot that was a Zeck cover. Man, we were able to get some really good artists to do, like, we had Mike Zeck on there, we had the J. Scott Campbell covers, and just I think we kind of stumbled on Beck to do those paintings. I think he had submitted something, and we just looked at him and thought, this is really cool. And we had a good solid run of him doing back covers, like 20-something issues, I think. He did back, plus some of the other like supplemental materials.
Good few.
And he was just a really good painter. He was an awesome dude too. I mean, I don't think he's dead or anything. He's probably still an awesome dude. I just haven't talked to him in a long time.
He's doing one of the 3 covers for this year's official Overstreet price guide to comic book values.
Sweet. I'm glad he's still waiting.
He's painting it's a Golden Age comics character.
Yeah, he had done a lot of painter work outside of comics. That's was his main thing. But I think he was just looking to get into doing comics work as like either liked it or it was just an extra market for him. But really accomplished painter though. He's very good. I like his stuff a lot. I think I still have. We used to. Okay, so with his paint work, he lived here in Cincinnati, and he would do his paint work and he'd shoot his own. They were like 4x6 transparencies, I guess. Not transparencies. They were
chromes.
Chromes. They essentially like positive negatives.
Yeah, it's a large format or medium format. It's like the master. It's not a negative. It's the positive. It's a slide. It's basically like an oversized slide.
Yeah, exactly.
For reproduction.
And so he would shoot those and he would send those to us in Chicago, and we had to buy this loud, slow, crazy, overpriced scanner. I remember at the time it was a Microtech, I think, but it was the only thing we had to have that scanner to scan in artwork anyway, because it was the only large bed scanner we could get, like affordably at the time. Something that you could fit an entire 11/17 sheet on without having to scan it in parts and stitch it back together again. But it also had a transparency adapter that would shine light through the backside so you could scan stuff like that. And the problem is I remember this because we had to do the way the scanner software worked. It wasn't very accurate color-wise, and it would kind of desaturate his paintings once we would scan them. So we'd have to go back in and kind of sit there and look at these oversized slides, like up to a light, or on a light box or something, and then like look over at the monitor and try to match the colors, like slide the saturation knobs and get the right match for it so it would print okay. And even then, sometimes stuff came out looking kind of chalky in print sometimes, I remember. I still got some of those somewhere. I think I have the Destro, and I might have the Snake Eyes and the Storm Shadow. The
chromes.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think because I think they were wound up in my files. Something. I think I was in charge of storing them or something, and then they just came home with me when I got laid off. I don't even know if I realized it until much later. But yeah, I still got. I think I have the Dreadnought one too, the Zartan one. Actually, I might have most of them now I'm thinking about it. Wow.
Well, these are, I don't mean monetarily valuable. I mean, these are valuable sort of in that they're important, in that if a publisher wanted to republish the Devil's Due era, that those chromes are either a better source to reproduce that artwork, though, it'd have to be scanned and like turned into a TIFF or whatever, or a PDF, or if the files, if the like PDFs to print new editions of the Devil's Due material that went to IDW after Devil's Due was no longer making comics, if those files got lost or don't exist or something, it's like you'd go back to an earlier step, which is these chromes. So I don't know if the next publisher of G.I. Joe Comics definitely wants these, but in a general sort of historical sense, these are important.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they presumably, Beck sold his work, so I don't know if he has any of those originals left himself or not. So I guess these would be the handiest way of reproducing them, like tracking them down and reproducing. And those IDW reprints of the Devil's Due era stuff, did they reprint Beck's work?
Mark?
I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest.
I didn't know.
I think sometimes some of the supplementary materials were a bit shortcut, so I don't have those IDW reprints, so I couldn't.
I'm sure they probably didn't put a whole lot of effort into it. I mean, I guess there must have been enough reason or incentive for them to do it at all, like monetary incentive. But I'm honestly surprised they bothered putting out collections of our stuff.
Yeah, the one thing that has never been republished for sure. I say one thing as if I'm being definitive, but the most significant thing that's never been published is the Snake Eyes Declassified prologue story that was specifically created for the Snake Eyes Declassified trade paperback by Hammer and Ron Wagner. The Silence Prelude, I think it's called.
I wonder why. That could have been something weird, like we lost the files or something,
Also, it would take an editor at IDW to either want to include that,
yeah,
or
know to
know that it's out there. And if an editor at IDW is looking at issues from Devil's Due and doesn't know that there were pages included only and originally in a graphic novel collection, might not know to go look for that.
Yeah, I forgot we used to do that sometimes. We'd throw bonus material in the trades to make them more appealing to buy or whatever. I mean, not just adding in like production work or sketch work. We'd do something like that, like do a new intro to it or something.
Yeah, even the supposedly definitive hardcover collection that was put out with lots of extra supplementary elements missed that one out. But never mind. We always raise it every time it comes up. So we've been keeping you quite a long time. Any sort of final thoughts really on the Devil's Due era before we release you back to the world?
I guess I would just say that, yeah, I mean, it's not like we were the perfect G.I. Joe incarnation or anything, but I think we hit as much as we missed. I would think. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's up for people like you to judge, really. I mean, how's it hold up 14 years later, 20 years later for some of it?
Was that rhetorical?
Well, I mean, literally, like, why are you guys reading it? I think I heard in one of the earlier interviews, like, you didn't read them at the time, did you?
That was Tim. Yeah, Tim started reading it, and it just wasn't for him. Wasn't the Hammer feel that is that sweet spot.
Right.
I was massively into it at the time, but even at the time, I recognised that there was some some hits, some not, some miss, but yeah, I was very enthusiastic for it as it was coming out. As I say, I was slightly addicted to the message boards and stuff, and
what was your nickname on the message boards?
Pardon?
What was your nickname on the message board?
It was Sparky.
I'm trying to think if I remember you or not.
Yeah, there was a contingent of English people who would sort of leave messages overnight for you guys, and
yeah.
So I typically had a sort of little gnome on a computer as my avatar, Someone commented that we were like little sort of fairy tale sort of gnomes who would tinker away overnight on the message boards, and they'd find all of this stuff that we'd written as they came in the morning.
Do you remember a poster on the Devil's Due message board that went by the nickname of Roller Destro? And he had like his icon was that, the pimp Destro with the leopard collar and stuff.
I don't, but actually I think I know what you're going to say.
Oh, okay.
Because I listened to your Crankcast where you mentioned this.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, just for anybody that remembers those message boards and remembers Roller Destro, that was Mike Norton. He would come on and troll the people like for shits and giggles, He was the quintessential actual troll. He didn't mean any harm or anything. He just did it to be a troll.
But to return to your previous point, I think the reason we're doing it is, I guess, because we're G.I. Joe enthusiasts and more specifically G.I. Joe comic enthusiasts.
Fair
and The Devil's Due is a significant era and is worthy of revisiting and sort of digging into and sort of rediscovering, or in my case, having not read it for almost 20 years, and Tim sort of finding anew, seeing what we can find there that sort of still really holds up, and being sort of objective and recognizing that there was some things that maybe didn't work quite as well as others as well, but still I think. Still, it was an amazing accomplishment that the team put together at the time, and were the era.
I have taught for many years, and I read comics actively. So comics I enjoy, and comics that I'm sort of reading so I know what's new, or because I've heard something about it, and I'm always trying to figure out how it works, or comparing it to something else that's similar, or something that did something better, or it's doing something and doing it better. And so to have this whole 7-year era of G.I. Joe comics that I mostly didn't read at the time, that I can read and talk about with Mark and sometimes other hosts or guests, and this word's putting too fine a point on it, but to analyze, right? To be critical and to critique. I find it all very enriching and entertaining. Even if I don't like an issue, or I don't like a scene, or I don't, like a cover, it's G.I. Joe, and I'm so interested in G.I. Joe, even the stuff that's not my favorite. And I want to talk about it.
That's cool. Because I was curious, because since this isn't canon or anything, it's not essential, I guess G.I. Joe Extreme is like us, right?
Well, I'd say less like, because it's a thing unto itself. It's not the same characters or attempting to be the same continuity. So I sort of see it just as a thing, an experiment to the side that you can kind of look at almost in isolation. I think Tim has got other views about it.
Well, I mean, another way of looking at this is that like canon. I mean, like the canon of the TV show. It's like, well, the comic books they're not in canon if your starting point is the cartoon
point. Yeah.
So it's just all of these stories, or the sort of finger quotes story you get if you read all of the toy file cards.
And I guess, Sigma 6, I guess, isn't in the same universe as regular, like, RAH or anything.
Right. And I mean, Sigma 6, I'll be critical here. I find what little of that I've experienced to be sort of generic enough. It doesn't really feel like G.I. Joe, but it is a branded G.I. Joe thing. And I'm sure we will get to it sooner or later in this podcast. I mean, if there were like G.I. Joe coloring books done by, some like licensee that didn't know what it was doing and didn't care.
I think there were
officially
Panini or something.
Well, I'm sort of making a joke here. If there was like really, really terrible G.I. Joe coloring books, we might talk about those on this. I don't mean if it was just drawings with no story, but if there anyway.
I gotcha.
I'm interested.
You're saying Devil's Due is really terrible comic books.
What I'm saying is I'm interested in all of G.I. Joe and what has been I mean, Mark said it before. I read the first 9 issues, 10 issues, and I thought, this is not for me, and I stopped reading it. And I dipped my toe back in twice, briefly. But to be able to get the history with guests like you and Blaylock, etc., just as when we're reviewing new issues of the IDW series and talking with the people who are drawing them, 6 months ago, 2 months ago, a year ago, I get to be like a G.I. Joe researcher, presenter, host, archaeologist. And that's great.
Right on. Well, I mean, yeah.
With Mark.
It's something, yeah, I get it. It's something you guys are really interested in, so it doesn't, you're kind of interested in the entirety of it, I guess.
Yeah. Some we love more than others, and even the stuff that we love the most, we can still be pretty objective about and try and figure out what it is that we love about it, but also recognize that there are things within it that maybe are still imperfect, and things like what degree nostalgia might play in how things connect with us and that kind of thing.
Right on. Yeah.
Cool. Crank. So just giving the mic back to you as we wrap up. Is there anything that you would like to promote, and where can people find you out there on the online world?
I will not recommend the podcast because, again, we don't ever recommend anybody actually listen to it. But it's out there if you want to go look for it, whatever. I guess, let's see, I'm working on Rick and Morty comics right now. A book called Undiscovered Country with a couple of, good writers and artists and color. Yeah, everyone, you know what I'm saying. Undiscovered Country is doing pretty well. 8 Billion Genies, which is another Image book as well. And we wrapped up Jonna last year. I don't know if there's any more of that coming or not, but it's still, the trade's in stores, and you can still find that, and it's a really fun story.
Volume 3 is coming soon, everyone.
Is it?
All 12 issues make up 3 little books.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think I saw that we've got a deluxe edition coming towards the end of this year as well, or something.
Thank you.
Cool.
At some point in the future.
I did just do one of the trade or OGNs I did last year. Is coming out from Dark Horse over the summer, I think. And it's called The Rock Gods of Jackson, Tennessee. It's a kind of teenage coming-of-age horror story, sci-fi music thing. I'm trying to think how to describe it. It's, these kids in a rock band and giant mutated pigs, I guess. So, and it's set like in right around like 1990, for that kind of vibe. Yeah. But that's coming in the summer, and then I recommend people check that out. That's Mike Norton's on the art on that, and a guy named Rafer Roberts. He wrote for I think he did Archer and Armstrong for a while. But anyway, and Alan Pasalacqua. It's me, Mike, and Alan are the Battlepug. Like, we all work together on Battlepug, and then Grumble, I think. Was it Grumble? No, that was Marissa. Anyway, yeah, check that out. Rock Gods of Jackson, Tennessee. It's coming from Dark Horse. I guess that's it, really. I could ramble, but I'm sure you don't want that, and I've done enough of that today already.
Very good. Tim, where can people find you when you're not talking to me about G.I. Joe things?
Video essays on film and television at our YouTube page, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store is in Somerville, Massachusetts, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Wow.
Excellent. And you can find out all about our show, Talking Joe, at the website talkingjoe.co.uk. Not nearly as fancy as the kind of websites that Crank would build, but it's what I've done.
I would build 20 years ago.
Even what you've built 20 years ago is probably better than my website. Links to all of the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. We're also on Patreon. Big thanks to all of our backers who are getting early access and exclusive content. But I think that is us done. And big thank you to Crank for joining us and revisiting 20 years past at Devil's Due. But for all of you, remember that...
Nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
Bye.
And that's us done.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Craig.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, being so generous with your time and your memories.
No problem. Again, thanks for having me. It was enjoyable talking to you guys.